We call Rosh Hashanah the New Year, and it is. Today is the first day of the year, at least by some reckonings. But Jewish tradition celebrates other New Years as well. Writing in the 13th century, Rabbi Moses ben Maimon, also known as Maimonides, identifies the Hebrew month of Nisan, the month when we celebrate Passover, as the first month of the year. And Maimonides then goes on to question why it is that we celebrate Rosh Hashanah on the first day of the Hebrew month of Tishrei, which is today, a half a year after we celebrate Passover. Maimonides then goes on to answer his own question, explaining that Nisan is the first month of the year when we look at our experience through a Jewish prism. After all, Passover celebrates our exodus from Egypt and therefore is the birth story of the Jewish people. It is the beginning of our story. Rosh Hashanah, on the other hand, celebrates the beginning of the world's story. Rosh Hashanah celebrates the birth of the entire human family. In this way, our tradition has always been clear. On Rosh Hashanah, it is our responsibility to look outward and recognize our existence in a global context. This is the time of year when we see the world's story as our story, when we recognize our brother's plight as our plight, when we see our sister's struggle as our struggle. This truth is reflected in a teaching from the Talmud wherein we are taught God created all of humanity out of a single human ancestor in order to teach that each individual merits the creation of the entire world. And for this reason, no individual may ever make a claim to superior lineage, saying, "My ancestors are superior to your ancestors, and therefore I am more deserving than are you." Our tradition teaches that humanity began with a single individual and thereafter a single couple, so that no one person and no one nation could look down on another and ignore the fact that our neighbor's narrative is our own narrative. And it is for this reason, on Rosh Hashanah morning, we read the Torah's telling of the creation of humanity, of the world of existence. Although much of Rosh Hashanah is about our own individual renewal, wherein we consider, each of us, what we want, who we want to be in our own lives, whether we are on the right personal path, if we are making progress towards our own individual goals. So too does this day speak of our need to focus on the larger community and upon our world as well. What would happen then if, on Rosh Hashanah, we asked the same hard questions about our community and our world that we ask about ourselves? What would happen if we were to ask whether we are living up not to the responsibilities we have to ourselves, but rather whether we are living up to the responsibilities we have to our brothers and sisters also? When on Rosh Hashanah we read that God created humanity in the form of a single human community and that our entire community reflects the image of God, we may draw comfort from the fact that at heart we are all the same and we share a common narrative. But in truth, if we are honest, we know this is not yet the case. The obligation we have toward our neighbors is a passionate and recurring theme in the Torah. Again and again we read stories that describe those who enjoy privilege at the expense of another as a consequence of human difference. Cain and Abel for their different abilities and occupations, Isaac and Ishmael for the nationalities of their mothers, Jacob and Esau for their physicality and skin color. Today we understand these distinctions and the ascribing of worth based on such accidents of birth to be fictions unworthy of our continued veneration. And so it is that one of the deepest concerns of our progressive Jewish faith is to establish a new moral order that does not accept privilege conferred by social status and superficial characteristics such as nationality, gender, and skin color. But wait, I can already hear the voice from the back of the room. Rabbi, I believe I know where you are going. Why is it that you're talking about this? Are we not blessed to live in a country that already affirms that all people are equal, endowed by our Creator with inalienable rights? Ours is a society, after all, where everyone is equal under the law, where everyone can rise or fall as a result of their efforts. All anyone need do is abide by the law, respect authority, and work hard. And besides, this isn't really our problem. And I agree with you to an extent. We do live in the most remarkable country on earth, and certainly our community, especially the Jewish community, has been especially fortunate. Only a few decades ago, it would have been easy to add Jews to the list of disempowered immigrants and victims of discrimination, but no longer. And while there are still instances of discrimination against Jews, acts of anti-Semitism, the crucial difference is that today, such acts of anti-Semitism that once marked an earlier era are no longer part of today's entrenched systems of power. Today's discrimination and prejudice are no longer problems the majority of Jews confront. We are fortunate, you and I. We are fortunate and privileged in ways our grandparents could never have imagined. Yet nonetheless, I maintain, discrimination and systemic racism is our problem and cannot be ignored. What's more, every one of us, Jews especially, should be concerned. As Jews, we possess the freedom, and our tradition teaches we have also the responsibility to advocate for the needs of those without the same significant privilege and political power we enjoy. And for this reason, we cannot and must not be silent. As Rabbi Abraham Joshua Heschel taught, there is an unbreakable link between Judaism and our addressing the injustices of racism. Said he, "To act in the spirit of religion is to unite what lies apart, and it is to remember that humanity as a whole is God's beloved child." Heschel continues, "Few of us seem to realize how insidious, how radical, how universal and evil racism truly is. Few of us realize that racism is man's gravest threat to humanity." And what's more, it was also Rabbi Heschel who admonished those of us who are privileged with the following words: "While few of us may be guilty, all of us are responsible." Now, I understand that talking about race is complicated and uncomfortable. And for these reasons, studies show that most white people do not publicly discuss race, and rabbis certainly do not typically go there during the High Holy Days. Certainly, this has been my own experience, at least until now. Coming before you, and once again, Rabbi Henry and I have written this sermon and share it with you in tandem, is admittedly a risky proposition because we are naming a discomforting truth, and we know well that what we say today may be heard by some as partisan. Political, yes, in that it affects our body politic. It is political, but it is not partisan. Justice, racial justice, and the unquestioned privilege that is part and parcel of the problem transcends the partisan divide. And for certain, addressing injustice anywhere against anyone is a profoundly Jewish thing to do. After all, our ethics assert that our society will be judged not by its success, economic or otherwise, but rather will we be judged by the way we treat those who are most vulnerable among us. During these most holy days, as we confront what it means to each of us to be true to our Jewish ideals, Rabbi Henry and I believe we can no longer ignore, nor can any of us any longer afford to avoid confronting the flaws in both our society and ourselves. In the last few years, it has surely been made clear to all of us that black people and white people simply do not have the same access to quality education, safe housing, equal employment opportunities, freedom from fear, and even the integrity of their own bodies. we learned the following story from an African-American woman. Her 10-year-old son was playing in her backyard when his ball flew over the fence and into the neighbor's yard. He quickly jumped the fence to get his ball back. When she saw her son walking back along the back of the house, his head framed by his hoodie, she went ice cold with fear. She immediately sat him down and described to him, "You cannot jump fences. You may never know who could see you and what they might think. Maybe your white friends can jump a fence to get a ball, but you cannot, not ever." He looked at her, afraid and confused. What could possibly happen to him for jumping a fence? Would it ever in a million years ever occur to you to have had that conversation with your child? In discussing this, Rabbi Henry and I talked about the fact that we have never even thought of sharing such a conversation with our boys. It would never have even occurred to us to have had that talk, what is referred to as the talk in African American families. Because in so many ways we know, you and I do, that each of us in this room is fully aware, that we almost dare not admit it, that our white privilege confers upon us a cloak of invisibility that allows us to avoid so many of the frightening realities our African American neighbors experience daily. Peggy McIntosh, one of the early scholars to define and describe white privilege, wrote words more than 25 years ago that still ring true today. White privilege is an invisible package of unearned assets that each of us can count on cashing in each and every day. It is an invisible, weightless knapsack of special provisions, maps and passports, visas, blank checks. Says another, white privilege means it is easier to get a job, to get health care, to get a loan to buy a home, to catch a cab. It's easier for us to raise our kids because they don't have targets on their backs. It's easier to shop in stores because no one assumes we're going to shoplift. No one is ever going to question us for driving a nice car, walking into a nice house, or being in a white, wealthy neighborhood. And we don't worry about being pulled over by the police while driving, or being stopped and frisked while walking in predominantly white neighborhoods. White privilege means that every single thing in our lives is easier. On this Rosh Hashanah morning, Rabbi Henry and I are talking with you about our white privilege in the context of all of us taking a personal accounting of our own souls, not because we are all not good people. Surely we are. We are talking about white privilege this morning because in our recognizing our privilege as a central component of our American Jewish identities, we believe we can all more effectively use our good fortune for good purposes. And then we can truly return to the essence of what being a Jew in the world means. That always we remember that we were once slaves, that we were once strangers, that we were once dispossessed, and we therefore must always care for the widow, the orphan, and the stranger. And we must tirelessly champion the cause of the last and the lost among us. Rabbi Gil Steinlauf, a conservative colleague in Washington, D.C., teaches, "Our people have been known by many names. Once we were called Hebrews, or Ivrim, which translates as the other, or those from somewhere else. And two, we have been called B'nai Yisrael, the children of Israel. And Yisrael means one who struggles with God. And so it is complex for us, you and me, because we are both. We are at once the other, a people who knows oppression, and at the same time we are blessed, we are privileged to struggle with the ultimate issues of life. Through the centuries, our moments of privilege have been all too fleeting. Mostly over the centuries, our hope has simply to be tolerated. And from our place at the periphery, we have always responded with the ability to critique injustice, to adopt the cause of the oppressed, to envision a better and more just world, and to commit ourselves to working toward that goal. And today, even though we are now accepted, and especially because we are now so successful in society, our moral responsibility is all the greater, and it is undeniable. And thus, For you and for me this morning, the essential question facing us is no longer, how do we free ourselves from oppressors, but rather, how shall we use our power and our privilege ethically? How shall we begin? First, we must acknowledge and come to understand our privilege as a reality. We must talk honestly to one another about the ways in which white privilege has benefited us and the ways in which our larger society suffers from it. Scientific findings suggest that children who grow up in race-averse homes where race is not discussed, they have a more difficult time dealing with race later in life than children who grow up in race-aware homes where race is openly discussed. For this reason, Rabbi Henry and I are committed to making Rodef Shalom a place where an honest dialogue about race and privilege and their implications is welcomed and encouraged. Second, we must recognize our privilege not as a right and an entitlement, but as both a reality and a responsibility. We must educate ourselves about systemic racism and privilege, its causes, its impact, and its potential solutions. And we need to draw from our tradition's moral teachings about the unity of humanity. And we must ally ourselves with people and groups who are addressing racial injustice and work in partnership to perfect our world. And it is for this reason, together with the Pennsylvania Interfaith Impact Network and with Black churches throughout Pittsburgh, that we are beginning a Sacred Conversations discussion group to do this type of sacred work. And we invite you to participate. And finally, if the awareness and articulation of our white privilege and the real responsibility we have to rectify this injustice makes you uncomfortable, may I suggest that we allow our shared discomfort to lead us to use our power and position in society to act in ways that create opportunities for real and lasting change, personal and communal, that will redound to the benefit of us all. Elie Wiesel, tireless champion of justice, voice for the most vulnerable, who died just this past July, said in his Nobel Peace Prize acceptance speech 30 years ago, "Sometimes we must take sides. Sometimes we must interfere. When human lives are endangered, when human dignity is in jeopardy, sensitivities become irrelevant. Wherever men and women are persecuted because of their race, that place must, in this moment, become our center of the universe." My friends, as discomforting, unsettling, and challenging as it may be, the reality is we are in a position to take sides. We are in a position to interfere. We are in a position to use our power and our privilege to perfect our world. And when we begin to do this, we will be fulfilling the call of this day on which we are reminded that all of humanity came from a single individual, this day on which our tradition tells us our whole world came into being, and in that moment we began to reflect in all our interactions the truest and fullest reflection of God. In the Genesis story of creation, which we shared only moments ago, at the end of nearly each day's work, the Torah tells us that God saw that it was good. The heavens, the earth, the waters, the planets, the stars, the flora, the fauna, all were good. But after creating human beings, on the penultimate day of creation, curiously, God does not say of human beings that we are good. The lesson: as God's partners, we are still yet responsible for working to ensure the dignity and well-being of every human being. We are still yet responsible for ending the injustice of discrimination based on skin color, station in life, ability, and other accidents of birth. As God's partners, we are still yet to complete the task of perfecting our world. And that, my friends, is our greatest and truest privilege of all. Shana Tova.